every single character has to have something really compelling that they're fighting for or want, you know? They can't just be...
Who taught you how to write a screenplay?
Let's see, I mean, I don't think any one person taught me how to write a screenplay. I definitely have read lots of the screenwriting books, you know, and things that you would be told to read, you know, like Save the Cat or all the other ones, you know. And I think those things are super helpful because knowing that structure is really important. You know, the podcast like script notes, you know, think anything like that. Like I think it's just as much of that information you can take in is super important. But I think at the end of the day, you just have to start writing and then you have to kind of figure it out, you know. And I think, at least for me, because again, that's how I really shine and learn is just by doing it. And so, you know, I had been writing stories ever since I was a little kid. I mean, I made my first movie when I was 8 years old, you know, and so I had always been kind of writing and telling stories. And so I think it is something I've been kind of working on my whole life. And even when I wasn't making a film, I was maybe doing something else, whether it's a commercial or this film festival I ran. I was still in some way kind of telling a story to an audience or kind of creating some sort of experience, right? And so I think it's writing is one of those things you're probably, like filmmaking, some element that's just born in you, right? That has that in you. And then it just takes a lot of time of just doing it and getting practice doing it. I mean, I think the books and other resources can give you a lot of inspiration and also really good at letting you then pick apart your stuff and figure out what's not working in it. But in the end of the day, I think you just have to kind of do it and kind of almost make yourself good by doing it enough.
How do you start writing a screenplay?
Like, I mean, me personally, I start with I guess the big picture concept. What is this about? From there, I would think about, you know, who are the characters, what's going to be compelling, and what are the stakes here. And then I think from there, kind of trying to figure out the structure. You know, I mean, obviously, there's lots of structure to a feature script. Not that it necessarily has to have that, but that's kind of how you usually write it, is kind of figuring out these acts and different points of the story, right? And I think that was helpful for me with this feature, just because Borrego is, in a sense, a kind of action movie. It is that kind of more of a commercial feel, even though it has a lot more to it than that. But it was still helpful to kind of have those kind of maybe beats and things along the way to kind of work towards. And I think that is super helpful to kind of know, okay, I have this much for that and that much for that. Not to be stuck into that, but it was helpful to kind of give me something to work towards. But I don't know. I'm not an expert. I don't think there's one perfect way of writing a script, but I think really it is important to have what is that really compelling idea and what is the really interesting things about each of these characters that make you want to watch them and create a story and drama from. Because if you don't have that, I think you're really going to struggle when you get to actually physically writing the words of every scene. And so I think now more than ever when I write something, it's kind of really doing as much diving into it before I even start writing to kind of make sure I have that there.
Would you see an Ellie or a Guillermo and kind of study them, a real life, and just even from afar and just envision, yeah, that, and then try to incorporate some of that into the script?
Yeah, I mean, I'm definitely someone wherever I go, I'm always watching people, and you know, I definitely think I take a lot from real life. I mean, I think that's one of the best things about traveling too, is, you know, wherever you are, especially if it's somewhere out of your comfort zone, you know, just seeing some little moment or something can give you so much inspiration. I mean, I'm always writing down ideas and little things I saw or people I talked to or a conversation I heard. You know, I think that's definitely a great way to, I think that's probably partly why you become a better writer usually as you get older too, is that you just have more life experience. You've witnessed more characters. You've had more stories. And I think that's something where, you know, as you're a younger filmmaker, you probably have to really pull more from yourself or from your family or things like that and find those connections, because obviously there's just so many rich characters out there in the real world that you can definitely pull from, for sure, yeah.
What about the dialogue for these characters? Did it take time to refine it? Because, I mean, they have a very interesting relationship, I'm sure more in the midpoint or...
For sure, yeah. I mean, dialogue is definitely something that's always really hard with a script, right? Is to make that sound really authentic and real. And you know, for me, when I write, I really kind of perform the script. You know, like I'm really not an actor, but I need to speak out loud when I write the script, and so I'm really almost like acting out the movie as I write it. And so I think, and I actually do a lot of it before I even write it down. I'll kind of be saying it over and over again. So I do spend a lot of time with the dialogue to kind of try to make sure it sounds realistic. And of course, your first draft is probably never going to be great, but as you go on, that's really what changes probably more than anything is the dialogue. I think the actual structure of the film is really similar to what it was in the first draft, but what's different is, other than some character probably development and expanding, is a lot of the dialogue and just continually working that to make that sound real. And then that really also continues when you go to make the movie. I mean, obviously some directors and writers are very strict about their scripts, but I was never like that, where if the actor has another idea for a way to say this, that's great. And especially in my case, the film has several scenes in Spanish, which I'm not fluent in Spanish at all. And so in those scenes especially, it was very important for those actors to kind of take ownership of that and be able to say this in a way that was casual or slang or however they would say that. But even in the English scenes, I try to have each of the actors be able to take something from their own life and bring it to that character. And so we did a lot of, adjusting even before we shot the film of what is this not something you would do, or how could we make this more relatable to you? And here's some words we could change here and there. And you're even doing that on the fly while making the movie, like doing a take and that didn't sound right. Like what else could we try, And so I think to get really believable, strong dialogue, it's just always about experimenting and kind of tinkering with it, I guess. That's really at least how I approach it.
What makes your writing process different from everyone else?
I mean, I can't speak for too many other people because I don't know that many other people's writing processes. But I mean, mine has been evolving, I guess. I mean, I haven't written that many things, right? And so it's kind of constantly learning, I guess, what works. I think the thing I just recently have been writing is this limited series that I've been developing. And I think for me, it was trying to take as much lessons as I learned from the last script, which is just that the characters really have to have, every single character has to have something really compelling that they're fighting for or want, They can't just be existing. They really, even if we don't know or in the story, hear every detail of it, I have to kind of know that exists and have it in my head. So I most recently kind of wrote a whole page or two on every character, and what was their backstory and what was their life like and all these things that are, maybe they won't even make it into the script. But I think I'm just doing as much kind of pre-thinking and planning as I can now, where I'll just be kind of meditating on it for a long time, and I'll get an idea and I'll take a voice note or something and I'll record that. And I spend a lot of time thinking about it before I even started writing it. And at least for me, that's, I think, what turned into one is it was a lot easier to actually write it when I did write it. And then two, I think it's the strongest writing I've ever had. And so I think the more time you can kind of just let it all sink in, I think does allow it to kind of marinate and kind of be even stronger.
In the script for Borrego, that's like a 3-year marination?
Well, for Borrego, I think it was slightly different. I probably more in that sense dove in quicker with the first draft and then spent a lot more time adjusting and changing and refining. Whereas the thing I've even more recently written that hasn't been made yet, I probably spent more time marinating, but then less time actually writing to get something really strong, So I don't know if there's one perfect way or anything, but at least for me, I think that's what I found and makes something really compelling is if I spend a little bit more time just kind of letting it all sink in before diving in to write it.
What was it about Borrego that just you couldn't stop writing?
I think there was just this personal connection for me with the film, both with this idea that started with my dad based on kind of him as this amateur botanist. But then too, just the desert itself was a character of this movie, really was like the fifth or sixth character of the movie was this landscape and was this desert. And I think just having grown up, I spent so much of my childhood camping and going on these desert adventures with my parents. That was just where they went. We didn't go to really Disneyland or other places. We did once, but mostly we went to the desert. And I wandered around the desert and thought of ideas and was, just in that kind of world. And so I think I just knew this was such a compelling setting, and so few things had kind of been set specifically in this desert. Almost nothing had been shot there. And I just loved that kind of movie. This is almost like a neo-Western of sorts. It doesn't really feel so much like a Western, but it kind of has a lot of that vibes, and I do like that kind of film. And so I just knew this was going to be a good film. I knew it was really important to make a film that I wanted to make a film that people wanted to see. I didn't want to just make a film that was too intimate and it would never get seen. I wanted to kind of make this blending of worlds where it had this kind of commercial appeal with some action and excitement and thrills, but also wasn't just that fluff either. It had dynamic characters that were interesting and authentic, and was something that kind of this blending of films that maybe doesn't exist as much. And I just knew that if I could pull that off, I could make something really, really interesting that people would want to see.
Do you believe that there are writing dead ends, or that a writer can always find a creative solution out of sort of what seems like they can't go any further?
I think definitely you could reach a dead end if you didn't probably do enough thinking ahead of time and kind of figuring out if this idea was going to work, perhaps. I've never not finished a screenplay or something, but I know a lot of people do struggle with that, where they get to a point they can't keep writing. But I think that's probably just because you probably started writing too soon before you really figured out what is this character's, I don't want to say motivation, but kind of, all those kind of typical things, like what those are real, like what is it this movie's really about, and what is it this person's fighting for, whatever kind of genre the film is. Of course, you can reach those kind of temporary dead ends probably all the time, struggling with writer's block and all that kind of stuff. But I think in terms of ones that you can't get out of, it's probably started because there's something missing in your kind of development of the overall concept.
Did you have any troubles with Borrego? Let's say the second act or the ending, anything where it was just a little bit more time spent on it?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think the second act is always the hardest, just because the first act is just setting up. You're kind of, even if you don't have the idea figured out, you can kind of set that story up and get it going right. And the ending, you hopefully know the ending or where it's going. And the stuff in the middle is usually what's the hardest, because it's longer usually, and it's what has to kind of keep the momentum going. And so I think that's probably where I had the most challenge of kind of figuring that out. I think also some challenges I had is, as I got into trying to actually finance this film, I did have to start cutting back certain things in order to make the budget work. So I had to start cutting some scenes and trimming some areas. And so then it kind of came more like a bit of a puzzle of like, okay, what could I take away that won't hurt the film, but will make us a cheaper film to be able to make? And so I think it's always this kind of constant kind of journey with the script, especially if you're making the script to direct. It never is this perfect linear process, I think.
What makes us care about the characters in Borrego?
So I think in Borrego, we care about the characters because they all have something that they're kind of fighting for or dreaming towards, So even we'll say bad guys in the Borrego, they're not really evil people, They've gotten into a situation that they didn't necessarily want to be in, but it's where they are, So in one case, they needed to support their family, and so they took a job doing something they knew that was wrong or illegal, but it was their only choice, or someone is running away from something in their past, and they're trying to put it behind them, but they know it's going to catch up with them, but they're just ignoring that. And I think there's something that we can all relate to in all these characters. Most of us aren't drug dealers and crossing the border and all that, but you can still find the humanity in these characters, and that was something that was super important to me, because I really wanted to be super sensitive to making a film about these kind of people and this border story, because I'm not from that world. I don't live that. I have lots of friends who have family members who are from that and could talk to them about that, but I really wanted to try to tell this in as, I guess, gentle and authentic as a way possible, where it wasn't really about that. The film sets that up, and that's what sets up the story. But ultimately, it's about just these individual people and what their choices are and what their beliefs are and what they're fighting for in their own life. And that's really what the film is about. And so I think that's what makes it unique and compelling for people to watch.